She sent a text to the wrong number. 3 words that were never meant for a stranger's eyes. 3 words that cracked open her chest and let the desperation bleed through the screen. Within 10 minutes, a convoy of black SUVs tore through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan, and the most dangerous man in New York stepped out of the darkness. Not because he knew her, not because he owed her anything, but because something in those 3 desperate words grabbed him by the throat and refused to let go. She wanted to disappear that night. Instead, she was found by a monster who would burn the entire city down before he ever let her vanish. If this story satisfies you through the very end, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The rain had been falling on Manhattan for 3 days straight, the kind of relentless downpour that turned the city's gutters into rivers and made every cab driver pretend they didn't see you standing on the curb with your arm raised. Ava Monroe didn't bother hailing one anymore. She just stood there on the rooftop patio of a restaurant she couldn't afford, soaked through her only decent dress, a black thing she'd bought at a thrift store on Lexington 2 years ago when she still believed her life was heading somewhere worth dressing for. The table for 2 mocked her. One chair perfectly positioned, the napkin still folded into that ridiculous little swan. The other chair empty. Had been empty for 47 minutes now. She checked her phone again. No messages. No missed calls. The dating app profile of the man who'd sworn he was really excited to finally meet now showed a gray circle where the green active dot had been. Offline. Gone. Ghosted before the appetizers even arrived. The waiter approached for the 3rd time. A young guy, probably mid-20s, with the kind of pitying look that made Ava want to crawl under the table and dissolve. "Ma'am, would you like to order, or—" "Just the check for the water," Ava said, not meeting his eyes. She could feel the couple at the next table watching, whispering. She knew exactly what they saw. A woman alone, overdressed for her tax bracket, pretending she wasn't falling apart in public. She'd seen that woman reflected back at her in every mirror for the last 6 months. She was so tired of that reflection. The check came. $8 for sparkling water she hadn't asked for because the waiter assumed she'd want the premium option. $8 she literally did not have. Her checking account had been overdrawn since Tuesday. The credit card she'd used to get up to this rooftop restaurant had been declined at the bodega that morning when she tried to buy a granola bar. She'd laughed it off to the cashier, made some joke about technology being unreliable, then walked 14 blocks to work because the Metro card was empty too. Ava paid with the emergency $20 she kept folded inside her phone case, the last physical cash she possessed on this earth, and left the restaurant without looking back. The elevator ride down to street level took 32 seconds. She counted every one of them while staring at the warped reflection of herself in the polished brass doors. Mascara running, hair plastered flat against her skull. The thrift store dress clinging to her body in ways that made her feel exposed rather than beautiful. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and the rain hit her like a punishment. Her phone buzzed. 3% battery. Ava stopped under the awning of a closed dry cleaner and opened her contacts. She scrolled to Sophie, her best friend since freshman year of college, the only person left in her life who still answered when she called, the only person who knew how bad things had really gotten. Her thumbs moved before her brain could construct anything careful or composed. I can't do this anymore. Everything feels impossible. She hit send and immediately felt the shame crawl up her throat. She hated being this person. The one who sent desperate messages at 11 o'clock at night. The one who needed saving. She'd spent 26 years trying to be the opposite of her mother. The woman who'd leaned on every man, every substance, every excuse she could find to avoid standing on her own 2 feet. And here she was, soaking wet on a Manhattan sidewalk, begging for emotional rescue through a cracked phone screen. The reply came fast. Too fast. "Where are you?" Ava blinked. That wasn't Sophie's style. Sophie would have sent a string of heart emojis, maybe a voice memo telling Ava to breathe, probably an offer to come over with cheap wine and trashy reality TV. This was something else. 2 words. Direct. Almost clinical. Before she could respond, another message appeared. "Stay there. I'm coming." Cold dread sank through Ava's chest like a stone dropping through dark water. She looked at the contact name at the top of the screen and her stomach flipped. It wasn't Sophie's number. The last digit was wrong. She'd mistyped it. Her shaking fingers and the rain on the screen had sent her most vulnerable moment to a complete stranger. Ava's immediate instinct was to type back, "What? Wrong number. Sorry, ignore that." But her phone died in her hand before she could finish. The screen went black. 3% had finally surrendered to 0. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the dead phone, rain drumming against the awning above her head. A wrong number. Some stranger out there had received her desperation and was apparently on their way to, what? Find her? Some random person in a city of 8 million people? She almost laughed. Almost. Then she heard the engines. It started as a low hum at the end of the block, the kind of sound that didn't belong on a residential stretch of the Upper East Side at this hour. Deep, mechanical, multiple vehicles moving in formation. Ava turned her head toward the sound and watched as 3 black SUVs rounded the corner in perfect sequence, their headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights scanning a prison yard. They stopped directly in front of her, not near her, not in the general vicinity, directly in front of the awning where she stood, as if someone had dropped a pin on her exact location and dispatched a military convoy to retrieve her. For 5 full seconds, nothing happened. The SUVs idled, their engines growling low, rain sluicing off their polished black surfaces. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like they'd been painted shut. Then the rear door of the center vehicle opened. The man who stepped out moved like he owned the rain. That was the first thing Ava noticed. Not his face, not his clothes, but the way his body cut through the downpour as if it were a minor inconvenience that the weather hadn't cleared itself for his arrival. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of lean, precise build that came from discipline rather than vanity. His suit was black, clearly custom, and it fit him the way expensive things fit people who never had to think about what things cost. Dark hair, cut close on the sides, longer on top, was already slick with rain, but he didn't rush. Didn't hunch his shoulders or shield his face the way normal people did in a storm. He stood there, both feet on the wet asphalt, and looked directly at Ava. His eyes were gray, not the soft, poetic gray of old movies and romance novels. A hard gray. The gray of a January sky over the East River right before a nor'easter hits. Eyes that calculated, assessed, and decided things about you before you'd finished your first sentence. Behind him, 2 men in dark coats flanked the vehicle. Large, silent, their hands resting at their sides in that particular way that meant they were carrying weapons and ready to use them. Every survival instinct Ava had spent 26 years developing screamed at her to move, to back away, to disappear into the nearest open business and wait for this nightmare convoy to pass. She didn't move. Something in those storm gray eyes held her in place. Not warmth, not kindness. Something far more dangerous. The absolute certainty that he had already decided what was going to happen next, and that her opinion on the matter was acknowledged but ultimately irrelevant. "Ava Monroe," he said. Not a question. Her blood went cold. "How do you know my name?" "You sent me a message." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a phone, a sleek black device that looked like it cost more than 3 months of her rent. He held it up just long enough for her to see the text on the screen. Her text. Her words. "I can't do this anymore. Everything feels impossible. Your phone number is registered to your name. Your name is linked to your current address, your workplace, and your last 3 known locations tonight. I had all of that before my car left the garage. The casual precision of it, the complete invasion of her privacy delivered with the emotional weight of someone reading a grocery list, should have terrified her. Who are you?" Ava's voice came out steadier than she expected, which surprised both of them. The man studied her for a moment. The rain fell between them like a curtain neither one was willing to close. "My name is Lucienne Moretti." The name landed in her chest like a fist. She didn't follow organized crime. She didn't read tabloids or watch those breathless cable news segments about New York's criminal underworld. But you didn't grow up in the boroughs of this city without hearing the name Moretti. The same way you heard the names of hurricanes, with a low, instinctive understanding that when it appeared on the horizon, you got out of the way. "Moretti," she repeated. The word felt dangerous just sitting on her tongue. "Get in the car." "I'm not getting in your car." Lucian tilted his head slightly, as if the concept of refusal was something he'd heard about but rarely encountered in practice. You're standing in the rain with a dead phone, no money, an address that's going to give you pneumonia in about 20 minutes. Your apartment is 46 blocks from here, and the subway station closest to you has been shut down for maintenance since 9 p.m. He paused. Get in the car, Ava. You can't just show up at... How did you even find me? I didn't send my location. Your phone's last signal pinged from a cell tower 400 meters north of here. Cross-referencing that with the restaurant reservation under your name on the rooftop of this building narrowed it down. The rest was line of sight. Ava stared at him. That's insane. That is genuinely insane behavior. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a crack in the marble facade that suggested he found her interesting. Not amusing. Interesting. And somehow that distinction felt more unsettling than anything else that had happened tonight. You texted a stranger that you couldn't do this anymore, Lucian said, and his voice dropped half a register, losing the clinical edge and landing somewhere quieter, somewhere that almost sounded human. Someone should have come for you. The fact that no one did before I arrived says more about the people in your life than it does about me. That hit her so hard she had to look away. She stared at the rain-blurred street, at the river of water rushing along the curb toward the storm drain, and felt something crack open inside her chest that she'd spent months trying to hold shut. He was right. That was the worst part. He was a stranger, a dangerous, terrifying stranger who'd tracked her through cell towers and dinner reservations, and he'd shown up. Sophie hadn't even responded yet. Her sister in New Jersey hadn't called in 3 weeks. Her landlord had slid a final eviction notice under her door yesterday with a yellow sticky note that said sorry, as if that single word could cushion the blow of losing the only home she had. Nobody came. Nobody ever came. Until this man. This wrong number. One ride, Ava said, and she hated herself for it even as the words left her mouth. You dropped me at my apartment. That's it. Lucian stepped aside and held the car door open. That's it. He agreed in a tone that made it absolutely clear that would not be it. The interior of the SUV smelled like leather and something expensive. Sandalwood, maybe. Or whatever cologne billionaires wore when they rolled through Manhattan at midnight collecting stray women from the rain. The seats were heated. The temperature was perfect. Classical music played so softly through the speakers that it was more vibration than sound. Ava sat rigidly in her seat, hyper-aware of the water dripping from her dress onto the pristine leather. Hyper-aware of the man who settled beside her with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his entire life in the back of vehicles, exactly like this one. One of the men from outside, square jaw, neck like a fire hydrant, dead-eyed in a way that suggested he'd seen and done things that would make normal people vomit, slid into the front passenger seat without a word. The driver didn't need directions. The convoy pulled away from the curb in unison, 3 vehicles moving as one organism through the empty streets. You should eat something, Lucien said, not looking at her. He was scrolling through his phone as if this entire situation, the rain, the rescue, the stranger in his car, was a minor detour in an evening already full of far more significant business. I'm fine. You haven't eaten since a granola bar at 7:30 this morning, which you didn't actually purchase because your card was declined. Ava's head snapped toward him. How could you possibly... I told you I had everything before my car left the garage. He locked his phone and slid it into his jacket pocket, then turned to face her. Up close, in the warm amber glow of the SUV's interior lighting, his features were sharper than they'd appeared in the rain. High cheekbones that cast shadows beneath them. A jaw that looked like it had been engineered rather than grown. A thin scar, barely visible, that ran from the corner of his left eyebrow up into his hairline. The kind of scar that had a story no one was ever brave enough to ask about. There's a place nearby, private, quiet. The food is exceptional. You'll eat, you'll dry off, and then I'll take you home. I said my apartment. And I'm offering dinner first. I don't eat dinner with strangers who track me through cell phone towers. You ate dinner alone tonight because someone else didn't show up. I'm offering you a better alternative. Ava opened her mouth to argue and then closed it, because he was right again and she was starving, and the heated seats were doing something treacherous to her resolve by reminding her body what comfort felt like. If I say yes to dinner, she said slowly, and then I want to leave, I leave. No argument, no negotiation, no second round of you deciding what's best for me. I walk out and that's the end of this. Lucian held her gaze for a long moment. Rain streaked the tinted windows beside him, casting moving shadows across his face. Agreed, he said. She didn't believe him, not for a second, but she said yes anyway. The restaurant didn't have a sign. It didn't have a visible entrance. The SUVs pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a nondescript building in the meatpacking district. And from there, Lucian led Ava through a service corridor that smelled like fresh bread and expensive wine, up a freight elevator that had been retrofitted with polished brass and soft lighting, and into a dining room that made her forget how to breathe. The space was small, maybe 10 tables, each positioned with enough distance to suggest that the conversations happening at them were not meant to be overheard. The ceiling was exposed brick, warmed by hundreds of candles and wrought iron fixtures that cast the room in a flickering amber glow. A wall of windows overlooked a private courtyard, where rain fell into a stone fountain surrounded by ivy. Every table was empty except one, the one in the center of the room. Already set for two. Ava slowed her steps. You planned this? I'm efficient. You called ahead while we were in the car. I called ahead before my car left the garage. She turned to stare at him. You set up a dinner reservation before you even knew I'd agree to come. Lucienne pulled out her chair and waited. I planned for the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome was me telling you to go to hell. And yet here you are. Ava sat down because her legs were tired and the chair was upholstered in velvet, and because fighting this man felt like arm wrestling a concrete wall. A waiter appeared instantly. Mid-50s, impeccable suit, the kind of composure that suggested he'd served people in this room whose names appeared in federal indictments and hadn't blinked. The usual, Mr. Moretti. For both of us, Lucienne said. And Ava didn't bother protesting because she didn't even know what kind of food this place served, and honestly, at this point, she would have eaten cardboard. The food arrived fast. Course after course, each one better than the last. A butternut squash soup that tasted like someone had distilled autumn into a bowl. Hand-cut pasta with truffle cream that made her close her eyes involuntarily. Grilled branzino with lemon and herbs so fresh they must have been growing on the rooftop 5 minutes ago. Ava ate like she was afraid the food would disappear. She ate with her elbows on the table and her napkin in her lap only because it fell there, and she made sounds that would have embarrassed her in any other setting. Small, involuntary moans of relief that had nothing to do with pleasure and everything to do with a body that had been running on coffee and anxiety for weeks, finally receiving actual nourishment. Lucienne watched her eat. He didn't touch his own food for a long time. Just sat there, one arm resting on the table, that gray gaze tracking every bite she took with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but instead made her feel absurdly like the most important person in the room, which she was, technically, since they were the only ones in it. But the feeling went deeper than that. It was the way he looked at her, not at her body, not at her face, but at her. At the hunger she was trying to hide, at the gratitude she was too proud to express, at the cracks in her armor that she'd spent years convincing herself were invisible. When was the last time you ate a full meal? Lucian asked quietly. Ava paused, a forkful of pasta halfway to her mouth. Define full meal. More than 500 calories consumed in a single sitting. She lowered the fork. That's a really specific definition. It's a medical one. Tuesday, she lied. Sunday, he corrected. A half portion of lo mein from the place on your block that gives extra to regulars who look like they need it. The fork hit the plate with a clink that echoed in the empty room. Okay, stop. Just stop. You need to stop knowing things about me that I haven't told you. It's not charming. It's not impressive. It's terrifying. Lucienne leaned back in his chair. For the first time since she'd met him, which, she reminded herself, had been less than an hour ago, something approaching genuine emotion crossed his face. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition, the look of someone who just found something they'd been searching for without knowing they were searching. You're right, he said. I apologize. That caught her off guard. She'd expected pushback, justification, some alpha male speech about how knowledge was power, and he'd only used his power to help her. The simple apology left her with nothing to swing at. Who are you, Lucian? And I don't mean your name or your reputation. Who are you that you tracked down a stranger over a wrong text and set up a private dinner in under 20 minutes? Lucian was quiet for a moment. He picked up his wine glass, red, something dark and expensive, and turned it slowly in his fingers. I'm someone who understands what it feels like to send a message into the dark and have no one answer, he said. I'm someone who decided a long time ago that if I ever had the power to respond, I would. The honesty of it disarmed her completely. She searched his face for the lie, for the manipulation, for the calculated move she knew had to be hiding beneath the surface. She found nothing but those gray eyes looking back at her with a steadiness that felt almost aggressive in its sincerity. "What do you want from me?" Ava asked. "And don't say nothing, because men like you don't do anything for nothing." "You're right, I don't." He set down the wine glass. "I want to help you. Your rent, your debt, the eviction notice, all of it gone by morning. No strings." "There are always strings. Not tonight." "Then when?" Lucien's mouth curved, not a smile exactly, but the suggestion of one. The architectural blueprint of what a smile might look like if this man ever fully committed to the expression. "I'll be honest with you, Ava, because I suspect you've been lied to enough for one lifetime. I don't know what I want from you yet. I know that I tracked you down tonight not because of your text. I get hundreds of messages a day from people who want my attention, my money, my protection. I tracked you down because of how the text made me feel. And I am not a man who feels things easily." She should have stood up, should have thanked him for the meal, asked for a ride home, and locked her door against whatever this was. That was the smart move, the safe move, the move that any rational woman in her situation would have made. Instead, Ava picked up her fork and kept eating. They talked for 2 more hours. Not about his world. He deflected those questions with practiced ease, redirecting conversations about his business the way a river redirects around stone, smoothly and without apparent effort. They talked about her, about the paralegal job she'd taken because law school was too expensive, and she figured proximity to the profession was almost as good as being in it. About the apartment in Washington Heights that she loved despite its crumbling walls and inconsistent hot water, because it had a window that faced west, and every evening the sunset turned the Hudson into liquid copper. About her mother in a facility in Queens whose care she couldn't afford but couldn't stop paying for because abandoning the woman who'd abandoned her felt like the final proof that the cycle was unbreakable. Lucien listened the way no one had ever listened to her. Without interruption, without advice, without that glazed-over look men got when a woman talked about her problems for more than 90 seconds. He listened like her words were data points he was collecting for some purpose she couldn't yet see. When the last plate was cleared, Lucien stood and offered his hand. "Your apartment," he said, as promised. The ride uptown was quiet. Ava leaned her head against the window and watched the city blur past. The bodegas and the brownstones, the fire escapes, and the fluorescent-lit laundromats. All the ordinary landmarks of a life she was suddenly seeing from the inside of a vehicle that cost more than everything she owned combined. Lucien sat beside her, his phone dark in his hand, his attention somewhere between the middle distance and her. When the SUV stopped outside her building, a 6-story walk-up with a broken buzzer and a front door that only locked if you lifted it while turning the key, Ava felt something she hadn't expected: reluctance. She didn't want to go back inside. Not to the dark apartment with the eviction notice on the counter and the empty refrigerator and the silence that pressed against her eardrums like deep water. For 3 hours, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. She'd felt seen. "Thank you," she said, reaching for the door handle. "For dinner. For all of it. Ava." She turned back. Lucien reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a matte black card. No name, no logo, just a phone number embossed in silver. "When you're ready," he said. "Ready for what?" "To stop surviving and start living." She took the card. Their fingers touched, and the contact sent something electric through her hand that traveled up her arm and settled somewhere behind her sternum with a heat she couldn't explain. "Good night, Lucien." "Good night, Ava." She climbed the 5 flights to her apartment with the black card in one hand and her dead phone in the other. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. The eviction notice, the stack of overdue bills on the kitchen table, the single lamp that worked casting a weak yellow circle on the ceiling. But something was different. On the kitchen table beside the bills sat a white envelope that hadn't been there when she left. Ava's hands shook as she picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount was enough to cover her rent, not just the 3 months overdue, but a full year paid in advance. A small note, handwritten in sharp, angular script, accompanied it. No strings. Not tonight. Ava sank into the kitchen chair and stared at the check until her vision blurred. She didn't cry. She was too exhausted to cry, too stunned, too something she couldn't name. She just sat there, holding the check, feeling the weight of a stranger's impossible generosity pressing against the walls she'd built around herself. Testing every crack, every weak point, every place where the mortar had worn thin. She should throw the check away. She knew that. Accepting money from a man like Lucien Moretti was the first step on a road that didn't have a U-turn. She'd seen enough crime dramas, read enough headlines, overheard enough whispered conversations in the courthouse where she worked to know what happened to people who got tangled up with men whose last names made prosecutors sweat. But the eviction notice was right there, and her mother's facility bill was due Friday, and the sound of the rain against her window reminded her of standing on that sidewalk, soaking wet, sending a message into the void, and having someone actually answer. Ava plugged in her phone and waited for it to power on. When it did, she found 3 things. Sophie's response, sent 40 minutes after her original text. OMG babe, are you okay? Call me tomorrow. Love you. A notification from her bank, overdraft fee, $35, pushing her further into the red. And a new text from an unknown number. The same wrong number, the number that had changed the trajectory of her entire night. I had someone fix your front door lock. It actually latches now. Sleep well, Ava. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she saved the number in her contacts. She typed Lucien and paused. Deleted it. Typed it again. Deleted it again. Finally, she saved it as wrong number and set the phone face down on the table. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with her eyes open, listening to the rain, turning the black card over and over in her fingers, feeling the embossed phone number under her thumb like Braille spelling out a question she wasn't ready to answer. 3 days passed. Ava deposited the check. She told herself it was practical, not personal. She told herself she'd pay him back. She told herself a lot of things in those 3 days, all of them reasonable, all of them logical, and none of them true. She went to work at the law firm, Kessler, Park, and Associates, a mid-tier practice in Midtown that specialized in corporate litigation and treated its paralegals like furniture that occasionally needed to produce documents. She answered phones. She organized depositions. She pretended her life hadn't been cracked open by a stranger's intervention and carefully reassembled into something she didn't recognize. But the world had shifted. Or maybe she had. She noticed things she hadn't noticed before. A black car parked across from her office building every morning. Gone by the time she left, but always there when she arrived. A new deadbolt on her apartment door that she hadn't ordered. Heavier, shinier. The kind of hardware that belonged in a building considerably nicer than hers. The bodega owner on her corner suddenly refusing to charge her for coffee, waving her money away with a nervous smile and a muttered, "It's taken care of." On the 3rd day, Ava picked up her phone. She dialed the number on the black card. Lucien answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice like a cat's purr. "The bodega on my corner, the coffee. What about it?" "You're paying for my coffee." "Among other things." "What other things?" "Your grocery account at the market on 181st. Your electric bill. The parking tickets you've been ignoring since March." A pause. "And a few items I'd prefer to discuss in person." Ava gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "This isn't normal." "No. This is controlling behavior. This is a man who has the resources to help someone and is using them. The distinction between generosity and control is consent. I'm asking for yours. By already doing it without asking, by demonstrating what I'm offering so you can make an informed decision." She paced her tiny apartment, the phone pressed against her ear, her heart doing something dangerous and rhythmic in her chest. "What exactly are you offering, Lucien?" Silence. Then quiet and direct. 1 week. 1 week of what? 1 week under my protection. I'll eliminate every financial pressure in your life, every debt, every bill, every threat hanging over your head. You'll have access to anything you need. In exchange, you give me 7 days to prove that what I'm offering is worth keeping. And after 7 days, if you want to walk away, you walk away. Everything I've already taken care of stays taken care of. No repayment, no obligations. You go back to your life with a clean slate. What do you get? 7 days to convince you not to. Ava closed her eyes. Every rational thought in her head screamed that this was a trap. That men like Lucien Moretti didn't rescue strangers out of the goodness of their hearts. That the golden rope he was offering would eventually become a leash. But there was another voice beneath those rational thoughts, a quieter one, more honest, less polished. And that voice said, "You are drowning. You have been drowning for months, and this man is holding out his hand." 1 week, Ava said, and I set the boundaries. Agreed. I mean it. This isn't a transaction. I'm not selling you anything. I'm not buying a beat. Not yet. She should have hung up. She should have thrown the phone across the room. When do we start? She asked instead. There's a car downstairs. Ava walked to her window and looked down at the street. A black sedan idled at the curb, its engine humming softly, its rear window lowered just enough to reveal an arm resting on the doorframe, an arm in a black sleeve. A hand that she recognized even from 5 stories up, because it wore a ring on the index finger, heavy, silver, old, that had caught the candlelight 3 nights ago in a restaurant that didn't have a sign. "You've been waiting outside my building," Ava said flatly. "I told you, I planned for the most likely outcome." She hung up the phone, stood in her apartment for a full 30 seconds, staring at the eviction notice that was no longer a threat, at the stack of bills that had already been handled, at the front door with its new deadbolt that locked properly for the first time in 2 years. Then she grabbed her jacket and walked downstairs. The car door opened before she reached the curb. Lucien sat inside, that ghost of a smile on his face, those gray eyes watching her with something that wasn't patience, wasn't hunger, wasn't affection, but was all 3 braided together into a look that made her chest tighten in ways she refused to examine. "Day 1, he said. Ava slid into the seat beside him. The door closed. The car pulled away from the curb. And the life she'd known, the struggling, the scraping, the daily humiliation of poverty in a city that worshipped wealth, began receding in the rearview mirror like a skyline disappearing into fog. She didn't look back. She should have, because somewhere in the gleaming darkness of Lucien Moretti's world, behind the luxury and the protection and the intoxicating feeling of being chosen by the most dangerous man in New York, something was watching. Something that had already marked her. Something that would make the rain-soaked sidewalk and the wrong number text feel like the safest night of her life compared to what was coming. And in the front seat, the dead-eyed man with the fire hydrant neck pressed a finger to his earpiece and spoke 2 words into the silence. "She's in." The city looked different from the back of Lucien Moretti's world. Not better. Not worse. Different. The way a familiar room looks different when you flip a photograph of it upside down. The streets were the same streets, the buildings the same buildings, but every surface now carried a second meaning that Ava couldn't stop seeing. The doorman at the luxury high-rise who bowed when Lucien walked past wasn't being polite. He was being careful. The restaurant manager who appeared with a private table before they'd even stepped fully inside wasn't being hospitable. He was being obedient. The men who flanked every room Lucien entered weren't bodyguards in the conventional sense. They were instruments, extensions of a will that didn't ask permission to reshape the world around it. By day 3, Ava had a new wardrobe. Not because she'd asked for one. She'd woken up in the guest suite of Lucien's penthouse, a room larger than her entire apartment, with sheets that felt like they'd been woven from something that had never known a washing machine, and found a walk-in closet that hadn't been there the night before. The clothes inside were her exact size. The shoes were her exact width. The undergarments were styles she'd never mentioned to anyone because they were the kind of private preference a woman kept to herself. She found Lucien in the kitchen, a vast, marble-countered space where a private chef was preparing breakfast as if this were a hotel and not a home. He was reading something on a tablet, a cup of espresso untouched beside his hand, and he didn't look up when she entered. "The closet," Ava said. "Good morning." "The closet, Lucien. Did something not fit?" "Everything fits. That's the problem." He glanced up then. Those gray eyes tracked from her face to the oversized t-shirt she was wearing. One of his, pulled from a drawer in the guest bathroom, and something flickered behind his expression that was gone before she could name it. I had someone take measurements while your clothes were being laundered on your first night here. It's a standard service. Standard for who? What kind of life are you living where measuring an unconscious woman's body is a standard service? You weren't unconscious. You were asleep. And the measurements were taken from the clothes, not the person. He picked up his espresso. I have boundaries, Ava. You tracked me through a cell tower. That was before we established terms. She stood at the kitchen counter and stared at him, trying to find the crack, the angle, the thing that would make all of this make sense in a way that didn't end with her face on a missing persons poster. But Lucien looked back at her with that impossible steadiness, and the chef placed a plate of eggs Benedict in front of her that smelled like everything her body had been begging for. And she sat down and ate because what else was she going to do? That was the pattern. That was how he operated. Not with force, never with force, with infrastructure. He didn't push her through doors. He simply removed every wall between her and the door he wanted her to walk through, until going in any other direction felt irrational. Day 4. Lucien took her to the opera, a private box high above the stage, screened from the rest of the audience by velvet curtains that a silent attendant closed the moment they sat down. Ava had never been to the opera. She didn't know the piece, didn't speak the language, didn't understand the story being told by the voices rising from the stage below. But something about the music found its way beneath her skin and settled there, a vibration she couldn't rationalize away. Lucien watched her more than he watched the performance. She caught him doing it 3 separate times, and each time he didn't look away. He held her gaze with that quiet, predatory patience until she was the one who broke contact. "Ask me," he said during intermission, while champagne appeared in crystal flutes as if materialized by thought. "Ask you what?" "Whatever you're afraid to ask, I can see it. You've been circling it for days." Ava took a slow sip of champagne. The bubbles burned her tongue. "The men, the ones who follow you everywhere." "Security. They carry guns." "Yes." "Why does a businessman need armed security?" Lucien turned his champagne flute by the stem, watching the light fracture through the crystal. "Because I'm not a businessman, Ava. You know that." The words landed between them like a blade laid flat on a table, not yet cutting, but making its presence known. "Say it," she said. "Say what?" "What you actually are. Say it out loud to my face, so I stop having to pretend I don't already know." Lucien met her eyes. The opera music swelled below them, a soprano hitting a note so high it sounded like glass about to shatter. "I run an organization that operates outside the law. I control territories, supply chains, and systems of influence that touch every level of this city's infrastructure. People who cooperate with me prosper. People who don't are removed from the equation. I've done things that would make you physically sick if I described them. And I'm sitting here telling you this because you asked, and because I don't lie to people I want to keep." The air in the private box went very still. The champagne in Ava's hand suddenly felt cold. "People you want to keep," she repeated. "Yes." "I'm not a thing you keep, Lucien." "Cien, I know." "Do you? Because the closet and the bills and the coffee and the opera box, all of it feels like you're building a cage and just decorating it really, really well." Something shifted in his face, a tightening around the jaw, a hardening behind the eyes. The kind of micro-expression that in a normal man might indicate frustration, but in Lucien Moretti suggested something far more volatile being held very tightly in check. "You're free to leave at any time," he said carefully. "I've said that from the beginning. And if I leave, what happens to the rent, the bills, my mother's care?" "They stay paid. I gave you my word." "Your word." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "The word of a man who just told me he removes people from equations. Those are different equations. Are they?" Lucien set his champagne down with a precision that made the crystal ring against the marble side table. "What exactly do you want me to say, Ava? That I'm safe? I'm not. That this world is clean? It isn't. That there are no risks involved in being near me? There are. Significant ones. I will not insult you by pretending otherwise." "Then why am I here?" "Because 3 nights ago, you sent a message to the universe saying you couldn't do this anymore, and I answered. And in the time since then, you've eaten 3 full meals a day, slept in a bed that doesn't have springs digging into your back, and stopped flinching every time your phone buzzes because it might be another creditor. You're here because your life before me was killing you, slowly, politely, and without anyone noticing. Ava's throat tightened. She hated him for saying it, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Every word was true, and the truth of it sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. "I'm not yours," she whispered. Lucien looked at her for a long time. The opera resumed below them, the soprano's voice climbing again, filling the theater with a sound that ached. "Not yet," he said. Day 5 broke something open. Ava called Sophie. She sat in the guest suite of a penthouse that overlooked Central Park and called her best friend from a phone that Lucien had replaced. Her old, cracked device traded in for something sleek and new that arrived on the nightstand with no note, no explanation, just the certainty that her needs had been anticipated and met before she'd even articulated them. "Where the hell have you been?" Sophie's voice was sharp with worry. "I've been texting you for days. Your old number stopped working." "I know, I'm sorry. Things have been complicated." "Complicated how? Are you okay? You sent me that text and then disappeared." Ava pulled her knees to her chest and looked out the window at the park below, where joggers moved through morning light like figures in a painting she wasn't part of. "I met someone." "Someone?" "A man. He's helping me. With the money stuff, the apartment, all of it." Silence. The kind of silence that comes loaded. "Ava." Sophie's voice dropped into the register she reserved for interventions. "What man? Where did you meet him?" "It doesn't matter where I met him." "It absolutely matters where you met him. People don't just appear and fix your life, Ava. That's not how reality works. Who is this person?" Ava closed her eyes. "His name is Lucien." "Lucien what?" She hesitated. The pause was long enough that Sophie filled it. "Ava, Lucien what?" "Moretti." The silence that followed was a different species entirely. This wasn't loaded. This was detonated. "Tell me you're joking." "I'm not joking." Lucien Moretti. The Lucien Moretti. The man whose name comes up in literally every major federal investigation in the tri-state area. That Lucien Moretti. "Sophie, are you out of your mind? Are you actually clinically out of your mind right now? Where are you? Give me an address. I'm coming to get you." "I don't need you to come get me. You're living with a mob boss, Ava." "I'm not living with him. I'm staying in his guest room. Temporarily, while I figure things out." "Figure things out." Sophie's laugh was sharp and joyless. "You sound like Mom." The words hit like a slap. Ava gripped the phone so hard the new screen protector creaked. "Don't. I'm sorry, but someone needs to say it. You sound exactly like her. Every time she moved in with some new guy who was going to fix everything, who was going to make it all better, who had money and promises and a really nice smile. That's what she sounded like. Exactly like this." "This is nothing like that. It's exactly like that. The only difference is the tax bracket. You're trading your independence for security and calling it rescue." That's what she did. That's what she always did. Ava stood up. Her hands were shaking. Her breath was coming fast and thin, and she could feel the edges of her vision pulsing with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite terror. "I called you because I needed my friend," Ava said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "You need to leave. That's what you need. Walk out of whatever building you're in, get in a cab, come to my apartment, and we will figure this out together. The way we should have been figuring it out all along." "You didn't answer my text, Sophie." Silence. "You want to talk about what I should have done? I sent you a message saying I couldn't do this anymore, and you responded 40 minutes later with a casual, 'Call me tomorrow.' 40 minutes. And in those 40 minutes, a stranger showed up. A stranger came for me. Not you, not my sister, not anyone who claims to care about me. A stranger. That's not fair." "No, it isn't. None of this is fair. But he came, and you didn't, and I'm not going to apologize for choosing the person who showed up." She hung up, sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in her lap, and stared at the wall until her breathing stabilized. She could feel the truth of Sophie's words like shrapnel lodged beneath her skin, sharp, painful, impossible to remove without making the wound worse. "You sound like Mom." The accusation echoed through her skull long after the phone went silent. Because Sophie wasn't wrong. Ava knew she wasn't wrong, and that knowledge sat in her gut like poison she'd swallowed voluntarily. She found Lucien in his study that evening, a room lined with dark wood shelves and windows that turned the sunset into something violent and beautiful. He was on the phone, speaking in low, rapid Italian to someone whose tone, even through the earpiece, carried the weight of bad news. His posture was different from how she usually saw him. Stiffer, his shoulders drawn up, one hand gripping the edge of the desk with enough pressure to whiten his knuckles. He hung up when he saw her. Transition instant. The tension left his body like a switch had been flipped, replaced by that practiced calm she was beginning to recognize as a mask. "Something's wrong," Ava said. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Manage me. You just told me 3 days ago that you don't lie to people you want to keep, so don't lie to me. What was that phone call?" Lucian studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the skyline. The towers burning orange and red in the fading light. The city stretching toward the horizon like something alive and hungry. "There's a man named Victor Sava. He controls territory on the east side. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. We've had an understanding for years, borders, agreements, a system that keeps the peace because war is expensive and neither of us needs the attention. Had an understanding. He's decided to renegotiate." "What does that mean?" Lucian turned from the window. The sunset behind him painted his silhouette in fire. "It means he knows about you." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Ava felt it in her sternum. A physical chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with the look on Lucian's face. She'd seen him calculated. She'd seen him controlled. She'd never seen him concerned. "How?" she asked. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you've been identified as someone I care about. In my world, that makes you a target." "A target for what?" "Leverage, manipulation, harm." He said each word like he was placing bullets into a magazine. "Victor won't come after me directly. He's not stupid enough for that. But he'll come after the things I can't afford to lose to force my hand." Ava took a step back. "I need to leave. Leaving makes you more vulnerable, not less. More vulnerable than staying with a man who just told me his enemies want to use me as a weapon against him?" "Yes. Because right now, you're inside the most fortified private residence in Manhattan, surrounded by 37 armed personnel who would die before letting anyone reach you. The moment you walk out that door, you're alone on the street with a name that Victor Sava has already written down." Ava sank into the leather chair beside the desk. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She pressed her palms against her thighs and felt the trembling in her muscles, the adrenaline flooding her bloodstream with nowhere to go. "This is what you were protecting me from," she said quietly. "From the beginning, not the debt, not the poverty. This." Lucien crouched in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. This close, she could see the scar above his eyebrow, the faint lines around his mouth that came from years of clenching his jaw against things he couldn't control. He took her hands in his. His fingers were warm and steady, and she hated how much comfort she drew from them. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "I was selfish. I wanted more time before the ugliness touched you. You had me in a cage this whole time. Sophie was right. Sophie doesn't understand this world. Maybe she doesn't need to understand it to be right about it." He flinched. It was small, a contraction of the muscles around his eyes that lasted less than a second. But Ava saw it, and it was the first time she'd ever seen Lucian Moretti react to pain. "Stay through the week," he said. "After that, I'll have arrangements made. A new identity if you want it. Relocation. Protection at a distance. You'll never see me again if that's your choice." "And if I stay?" Lucian's hands tightened around hers. "If you stay, I can protect you in ways distance never could. But staying means accepting what I am. All of it. The parts you've seen and the parts I've kept from you." "What parts have you kept from me?" His jaw worked. She watched the muscles shift beneath his skin as he decided how much truth was too much. "I've killed people, Ava." The words didn't land like she expected. They didn't explode. They settled, slowly, heavily, like ash falling after a fire. "I know," she said. "You know. I've known since the opera, maybe since the first night. You don't build what you've built without—" She stopped, swallowed. "I knew. I just wasn't ready to hear you say it." They stayed there, his hands around hers, her eyes locked on his. the sunset dying behind them and the room darkening in slow degrees until they were just two shadows holding on to each other in a city that had already decided their story would end in blood. Ava's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. An unknown number. A photograph. Her stomach turned to ice. The image showed the front entrance of a care facility in Queens, her mother's facility. The angle was taken from across the street, close enough to read the name on the door, close enough to see the wheelchair ramp, close enough to identify the window on the second floor where her mother sat every afternoon watching traffic pass. Beneath the photo, a single message. The one who texted the wrong number has people she loves in the wrong places. Ava's hands went still, her breath stopped. She looked up at Lucian and saw that he was already reading the message on her screen, his expression shifting from concern to something far more dangerous, a cold, absolute fury that transformed his features into something barely human. "Don't move," he said, and his voice was a sound she had never heard before. Low, flat, emptied of everything except intent. He straightened up and pulled his phone from his pocket. The call he made lasted 11 seconds. "Mobilize for the Queen's facility. Full extraction. No one in or out until I arrive." He hung up and looked at Ava. The man standing in front of her now bore no resemblance to the one who'd held her hands 30 seconds ago. This was the other one, the one the city whispered about, the one who removed people from equations. "I'm going to take care of this," he said. "Stay here. Marco will be outside the door. Do not leave this room." "Lucien." "Ava." His voice cut through her protest like a blade. "Your mother is in danger because of me. Let me fix what I've broken." He turned and walked out of the study. The door closed behind him with a sound that was far too quiet for how much it changed. Ava sat alone in the darkening room, the photograph of her mother's facility burning on her phone screen, and felt the last wall she'd been holding up collapse inside her chest. There was no more pretending, no more negotiating with herself about boundaries and timelines and exit strategies. She was in Lucian Moretti's world now, and the world had just shown her exactly what that cost. Ava counted Lucian's heartbeats before he left. Not consciously. Her hand had been pressed against his chest during those last seconds in the study, and she'd felt the rhythm beneath his shirt. Steady, controlled, mechanical. The heartbeat of a man who compartmentalized violence the way other people compartmentalize their work emails. Separate folder. Separate drive. Open when needed, close when done. The door shut behind him, and Ava was alone with the photograph still burning on her phone screen. She stared at her mother's facility. The wheelchair ramp, the beige siding, the second-floor window where Margaret Monroe spent her afternoons watching buses pass with eyes that no longer recognized her own daughter half the time. The woman who dragged Ava through a childhood, littered with bad men and worse decisions, who taught her by negative example everything she knew about survival, was now sitting in a building that someone with a camera and a grudge had turned into a message. Marco stood outside the study door. She could hear him breathing, slow, bovine, the breath of a man built for standing and waiting and, when required, for breaking things. She didn't try the door. There was nowhere to go. 41 minutes passed. Ava knew because she counted every one of them, the way she'd counted the elevator seconds on the night they met. Counting was the only thing that kept the panic from eating through her chest wall and spilling into the rest of her body. 41 minutes of sitting in a darkening room, watching the last stripe of sunset slide off the wall and disappear, leaving her in the blue-gray twilight of a penthouse that suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a holding cell. Her phone rang. Not Lucian's number, not Sophie's. An unknown caller with a 718 area code. Queens. She answered. "Miss Monroe." A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "This is Director Paulson at Greenfield Assisted Living. I'm calling about your mother." Ava's spine went rigid. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. She's perfectly safe. But I need to inform you that approximately 30 minutes ago, a group of men arrived at our facility and insisted on relocating Mrs. Monroe to an undisclosed location. They presented documentation claiming to be acting on behalf of your family." "What documentation?" "A power of attorney transfer. Signed by you, apparently." "I didn't sign anything. I suspected as much, which is why I refused the transfer and contacted you directly." The men became quite insistent. "They're still here, Miss Monroe. They're in our lobby right now. I've called the police, but I thought you should know." "Don't let them near her." Ava was on her feet, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Do not let anyone near my mother. Lock the floor, lock her room. I don't care what papers they have. The police are on their way." "But Miss Monroe, the men—" They mentioned a name. They said Mr. Moretti authorized the transfer. The room tilted. Ava gripped the edge of the desk. The phone pressed against her ear so hard the screen dug into her cheekbone. She heard Director Paulson saying something else. Logistics, police arrival estimates, standard protocol language. But the words collapsed into white noise beneath the single sentence detonating inside her skull. They said Mr. Moretti authorized the transfer, not Victor Sava, not the enemy. Lucien, the call he'd made when he left the study. 11 seconds. Mobilize for the Queen's facility. Full extraction, no one in or out until I arrive. She'd heard the words and interpreted them as protection, as rescue, as the dangerous man she'd chosen deploying his army to save her mother from the threat he'd shown her on the phone screen. But the facility director wasn't describing a rescue. She was describing a seizure. Men with forged documents. A power of attorney Ava never signed. An authorized transfer she never approved. And Lucien's name attached to all of it like a signature on a confession. Ava hung up the phone. She stood in the dark study for 10 seconds. Her body was doing something it had never done before. Shaking not from fear, but from a fury so complete it felt geological, tectonic, a shifting of plates deep beneath the surface of who she thought she was. She crossed the room and opened the door. Marco turned, his massive frame blocking the hallway like a wall of muscle and bad intentions. Mr. Moretti said, "Move." "Ma'am, I can't let you—" "Move, Marco. Move right now or I will scream so loud every person in this building will hear it. And then I'll call 911 and tell them exactly where I am and exactly who I'm with and let them sort out the rest." Marco's expression didn't change. Men like him didn't have expressions. They had settings, and his was currently toggling between his orders and the very real problem of a woman who looked like she was ready to claw through drywall. He stepped aside. Ava moved through the penthouse like she was memorizing it for the last time. The marble floors, the art on the walls that cost more than her entire existence. The kitchen where she'd eaten eggs Benedict and pretended this was something it wasn't. She reached the private elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. Inside the elevator, she caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back at her was someone she almost didn't recognize. Not the soaking wet disaster from the restaurant rooftop. Not the grateful, conflicted guest eating someone else's food in someone else's home. This woman had flat eyes and a clenched jaw and the posture of someone who'd just discovered that the hand pulling her out of the water had been the one holding her under. The elevator reached the garage level. Two of Lucien's men stood at the entrance to the parking structure, flanking a row of black vehicles like sentries. They saw her coming and exchanged a glance, the universal look of subordinates who hadn't been briefed on this particular scenario. "I need a car," Ava said. "Now." "Ma'am, Mr. Moretti's instructions—" "I don't care about his instructions. Give me a car or give me the street. Pick one." The taller of the two men, younger, mid-30s, with a scar along his jawline and the nervous energy of someone who knew he was about to make a decision his boss would question, reached into his pocket and produced a set of keys. "The silver sedan," he said. "Second row." She took the keys without thanking him and found the car. A Mercedes that started with a whispered purr, nothing like the buses and borrowed vehicles she'd driven her whole life. She pulled out of the garage and into the Manhattan night, gripping the steering wheel with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The drive to Queens took 38 minutes. She spent every one of them replaying the last 5 days in her head, pulling apart every conversation, every gesture, every carefully constructed moment of intimacy, and examining it under the brutal fluorescent light of what she now suspected was true. The cell tower tracking. The background check completed before his car left the garage. The closet full of clothes measured from her sleeping body. The bills paid without permission. The phone replaced without consent. The coffee, the groceries, the parking tickets. Every thread of her life gathered into his hands so gradually, so gently, that she'd mistaken the tightening for an embrace. "You sound like Mom." Sophie's words played on repeat, every time she moved in with some new guy who was going to fix everything. Ava gripped the wheel harder and drove faster. She arrived at Greenfield Assisted Living at 9:47 p.m. The parking lot was a mess. Two police cruisers with their lights still spinning, an unmarked black SUV that she recognized as Lucien's fleet, and a cluster of people near the front entrance engaged in the kind of tense, controlled conversation that happens when men with badges meet men with lawyers. Ava parked and walked straight through all of it. Director Paulson met her inside. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and the expression of someone who'd seen enough institutional chaos to know when a situation was personal. "Your mother is upstairs," she said, untouched. The men left when the officers arrived. "The paperwork they brought. I need to see it." Director Paulson handed her a manila folder. Ava opened it and felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The power of attorney was a perfect forgery. Her signature, replicated with frightening accuracy. The notary stamp, the filing numbers, the legal language, all impeccable. And at the bottom of the second page, a line she'd missed on her first scan. Authorized Representative, Moretti Holdings, LLC. Not a forged document from Victor Sava's people. A document generated by Lucien's own legal infrastructure. Ava closed the folder. Her hands were steady now. The trembling had stopped, replaced by something cold and still and infinitely more dangerous. She went upstairs. Her mother was asleep. Margaret Monroe lay in her narrow bed with the television murmuring a late-night talk show and the blanket pulled up to her chin the way Ava used to tuck it when she visited on Sundays, back when she could afford the bus fare, back when the visits didn't end with her crying in the parking lot because her mother had called her by her dead aunt's name. Ava sat in the chair beside the bed and watched her mother breathe. This was the woman who'd failed her, who'd dragged her through roach-infested apartments and introduced her to uncles who stayed for 6 months and left bruises, who'd chosen bottles over bedtime stories and strangers' beds over her own daughter's school plays. Margaret Monroe had been a catastrophe of a mother, and Ava had spent her entire adult life trying to be the opposite of everything Margaret represented. And here she was, in a care facility, targeted because her daughter had repeated the exact same pattern, falling for a powerful man who promised salvation and delivered captivity. Her phone buzzed. "Lucien," she answered. "Where are you?" His voice was tight, controlled, but beneath the control she heard something she'd never heard before, an urgency that bordered on panic. "With my mother." "Ava, listen to me. Moretti Holdings, LLC." Silence. "That's the name on the power of attorney your people brought here tonight. Your company, your paperwork. Your men tried to take my mother from this facility using forged documents with my signature, and your company's name is on every page. It's not what it looks like." Don't you dare give me that line. I have the folder in my hands, Lucien. I'm reading your company name on a document that authorizes removing my mother from the only safe place she has. Explain that. Explain it right now." She heard him breathe. A long, slow exhale. The sound of a man choosing his next words with the same precision he chose everything else. Victor's people were coming for her. I had 40 minutes. A legal transfer was the fastest way to get her out before they arrived. The forged signature was necessary because we didn't have time to reach you, and the facility wouldn't release her without documented authorization. So you forged my signature. To save her life. You forged my identity. You created legal documents in my name without my knowledge or consent. You used your corporate infrastructure to claim authority over my mother's care. And you want me to thank you for it? I want you to understand that the alternative was Victor Sava's men reaching that facility first. How do I know they were coming at all? The question dropped between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. How do I know, Ava continued, her voice low and lethal, that the photograph on my phone wasn't sent by your people? How do I know this entire thing, the threat, the panic, the noble rescue, wasn't manufactured to make me feel like I can't survive without you? Because that's what men like you do, Lucien. You create the danger and then you sell the protection. Ava, my mother is a pawn to you. I'm a pawn to you. This entire week has been a chess game, and I've been sitting here thinking I was a player when I was just a piece you were moving around the board. That is not true. Then come here, right now. Come to this facility, walk into this room, look me in the eyes, and tell me you didn't orchestrate any part of tonight. Tell me you didn't send that photograph. Tell me Victor Sava is real, and not just a convenient story you invented to keep me trapped in your penthouse. Lucien was quiet for a long time. She could hear the city on his end, distant sirens, the hum of an engine, the muffled voices of men receiving instructions. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The control was still there, but something beneath it had fractured. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." He hung up. Ava lowered the phone and looked at her mother's sleeping face. The television cast blue light across Margaret's features, smoothing the wrinkles, softening the years of damage into something that almost looked peaceful. "I'm not you," Ava whispered to the sleeping woman. "I'm not going to be you." She stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the parking lot where the police cruisers were pulling away, their lights finally dark, the crisis officially filed under resolved by people who had no idea what was actually happening. 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, Lucien Moretti would walk through that door, and she would have to decide if she believed the man who'd pulled her out of the rain or the evidence sitting in a manila folder that suggested he'd been engineering her dependence from the very first text. Her phone buzzed again. Not Lucien, not Sophie, an unknown number. She opened the message and her blood turned to ice water in her veins. It was a video, 12 seconds long, shot from a camera angle that could only have been inside Lucien's penthouse study, the room she'd been sitting in an hour ago. The footage showed Lucien on his phone call, the one he'd made before leaving. But the audio was different from what she'd heard through the closed door, clearer, unobstructed. And the words were not what she'd been told. The Monroe woman's mother, Greenfield assisted living in Queens. Get a transfer team there before Sava's people realize she matters. I want the old woman in our facility by midnight. If the daughter resists, remind her she has nowhere else to go. If the daughter resists, remind her she has nowhere else to go. Ava played the video again and again. The words didn't change. The voice didn't change. The cold transactional calculation in Lucien's tone didn't change. She'd been right about all of it. The rescue wasn't a rescue. The protection wasn't protection. The man who'd answered a wrong number text and showed up in the rain like some dark fairy tale wasn't a savior. He was the trap, and she'd walked into it willingly, gratefully, desperately, just like her mother had walked into every trap before her. Ava deleted the video, deleted Lucien's contact, deleted every message. Then she opened the manila folder, pulled out the forged power of attorney, and folded it into her jacket pocket. She leaned down and kissed her mother's forehead. "I'm going to fix this," she said, "but not his way." She walked out of the room, down the stairs, through the lobby, and into the parking lot where the silver Mercedes sat waiting like a loaded weapon. She got in, turned the key, and sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the dark Queens street, knowing that the man who'd rebuilt her life was 15 minutes away, and that everything she'd accepted from him, every meal, every dress, every paid bill, every moment of warmth, had been the price of her own cage. Headlights appeared at the end of the block. A convoy. Black SUVs. 3 of them, moving in formation the way they had that first night in the rain. He was here. Ava had 90 seconds to decide who she was going to be. The woman who stayed. Who believed the beautiful lie one more time. Who climbed into the back of his car and let the heated seats and the steady heartbeat and the storm-gray eyes convince her that captivity was just another word for love. Or the woman who drove. The convoy was 50 yards away now. She could see the headlights reflected in her rearview mirror growing brighter, growing closer. Ava turned the key. The Mercedes roared to life, and she drove straight past the convoy, through the red light at the intersection, and into the dark arteries of Queens with nothing but a stolen car, a forged document, and the devastating certainty that the most dangerous man in New York was now behind her, and that he would not stop coming. The Mercedes ate through Queens like an animal fleeing fire. Ava drove with both hands locked on the wheel, knuckles bone white, eyes jumping between the road ahead and the rearview mirror where Lucien's convoy had already reversed direction and was threading through traffic 3 blocks behind her. The headlights pulsed in her mirror like the eyes of something hunting, patient, methodical, closing the distance with an efficiency that said these drivers had done this before. Chased people, caught them. She ran a second red light on Queens Boulevard and nearly clipped a delivery truck making a left turn. The driver laid on his horn and the sound tore through the night like a scream. Ava didn't flinch. She was past flinching. Her body had entered that state beyond fear, where the nervous system stops negotiating with panic and simply commits to forward motion. She needed a plan. She needed a destination. She needed something beyond the raw animal impulse to put distance between herself and the man she'd let dismantle every wall she'd ever built. Sophie. The thought surfaced like a hand breaking through water. Sophie lived in Brooklyn, Park Slope, a third-floor walk-up above a Thai restaurant. 30 minutes from here if traffic cooperated. Sophie who'd warned her. Sophie who'd said the words Ava hadn't been ready to hear. Sophie who'd been right about everything. Ava merged onto the BQE heading south and pressed the accelerator until the speedometer touched 85. The Mercedes responded like it had been waiting for someone to finally ask it to run. Behind her, the convoy's headlights shrank but didn't disappear. They were hanging back now, so not chasing, exactly. Following. The distinction made her skin crawl because it implied Lucien wasn't trying to catch her. He was letting her run, waiting for her to exhaust herself, confident that the inevitable endpoint was the same regardless of how many miles she burned. Her phone rang. His name, except she'd deleted his contact, so the screen just showed the number, 10 digits that she'd already memorized without meaning to. She declined the call. It rang again. Declined. Again. Declined. The fourth time, a text appeared instead. Ava, the video you received was altered. I need 5 minutes to explain. Pull over. She almost laughed. Almost. The sound that came out of her throat was closer to a bark. Sharp. Humorless. The noise a cornered dog makes when it stops being afraid and starts being dangerous. Another text. Victor sent that video. His people had the study bugged. The audio was spliced from 3 separate conversations to fabricate a statement I never made. I can prove it. Pull over. Ava threw the phone onto the passenger seat and took the exit toward the Brooklyn Bridge. The bridge was nearly empty at this hour, a rare thing, a gift. The Mercedes crossed the East River with the Manhattan skyline burning behind her like a city she was leaving for the last time. The cables of the bridge strobed past her window in rhythmic shadows, and she counted them the way she counted everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, because counting kept the thoughts from swallowing her whole. She reached Sophie's block at 10:34 p.m. The Thai restaurant was closed, its neon sign dark, the sidewalk empty except for a cat investigating a takeout container near the storm drain. Ava parked illegally, the Mercedes jutting halfway into a loading zone, and ran to the building entrance. She buzzed Sophie's apartment. No answer. Buzzed again. Again. Her finger stayed on the button for a full 15 seconds, the sound screaming up through the building's old wiring. The intercom crackled. Who the hell? It's me. Let me up. The door buzzed open. Sophie was waiting at her apartment door in a bathrobe, hair wet from a shower, face stripped of makeup, and full of the kind of worry that erases all other expressions. She took one look at Ava, wild-eyed, shaking, wearing clothes that cost more than Sophie's rent, and pulled her inside without a word. He lied to me. Ava said it before Sophie could ask. About everything. You were right about all of it. You were right. Sit down. I can't sit down. He's following me. His people tracked me here. They tracked me across the city. They'll track me to this building. They probably already know your address. Sophie's face went pale. She walked to the window and looked down at the street. The cat was gone. The sidewalk was empty. I don't see anyone. You won't. That's how they operate. You don't see them until they want you to see them. Ava, slow down. Talk to me. What happened? So Ava talked. She talked the way a dam breaks. All at once, uncontrolled. The pressure of 5 days' worth of denial and desire and self-deception flooding out in a torrent of words that she couldn't organize and didn't try to. The forged power of attorney. The video. The facility. Her mother asleep in a bed that had become a bargaining chip. The man who'd answered a wrong number text and turned her gratitude into a leash so elegant she'd mistaken it for jewelry. Sophie listened without interrupting. When Ava finished, Sophie was sitting on the arm of her couch with her hands clasped between her knees and her face set in an expression that Ava recognized. The look Sophie wore when she was about to say something that would either save you or destroy you. You need to go to the police. And say what? A mobster paid my rent and bought me clothes? They'll laugh me out of the precinct. You have forged documents with his company's name on them. That's fraud. That's identity theft. And the moment I hand those to the police, Lucien Moretti becomes the subject of an investigation, and I become the woman who put him there. Do you know what happens to people who put men like him in the crosshairs of federal investigators? Sophie's jaw tightened. So what's the alternative? You just run forever? I don't know. I don't know the alternative. I don't have a plan. I have a stolen car and a forged document and approximately $400 in a bank account that he probably owns by now. A buzz from the street intercom. Both women froze. Sophie looked at Ava. Ava looked at the door. The intercom buzzed again. Then a voice, not through the speaker, but from the hallway. Close. Too close. Miss Monroe. Marco's voice, thick and flat, carried through the thin apartment door like a fist wrapped in cloth. Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. He's downstairs. Ava's breath seized in her chest. Sophie stood up, her bathrobe suddenly looking less like casual evening wear and more like the last layer of armor a civilian had before the real world kicked in the door. You don't have to go, Sophie whispered. If I don't go down, he'll come up. Let him try. I'll call 911. And have 2 police officers try to contain a man who controls half the judges in this city? Ava shook her head. No, I'll go. But I need you to do something for me. She pulled the folded power of attorney from her jacket pocket and pressed it into Sophie's hands. If anything happens to me, anything, you take this to the FBI field office on Federal Plaza. Not the police, the FBI. You ask for the Organized Crime Division and you hand them this document. Can you do that? Sophie's hands were shaking, but her eyes were steady. Nothing's going to happen to you. Can you do that, Sophie? Yes. Ava hugged her. Quick, fierce, the kind of hug that says things words can't reach. Then she walked to the door, opened it, and found Marco standing in the hallway like a monument. He didn't touch her, didn't speak again. Just turned and walked toward the stairs, and Ava followed him down 3 flights and out the building entrance into the Brooklyn night. Lucian was leaning against the hood of the center SUV, no suit jacket. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing the black ink of tattoos that crawled up his forearms. Designs she'd glimpsed but never studied, marks that mapped a history written in a language she didn't speak. His hair was disordered, his collar undone, and for the first time since she'd met him, Lucian Moretti looked like a man who'd been outrun by something he couldn't control. He straightened when he saw her, took a single step forward, stopped. The video was fabricated, he said. No preamble. No warm-up. Victor's people planted surveillance in my study 3 days ago. The audio you heard was edited. Sentences pulled from 4 separate phone calls over 2 weeks and stitched together to create a statement I never made. I can show you the original recordings. Every word. Time-stamped, verified. Ava stood on the sidewalk, 6 feet of Brooklyn concrete between them, and studied the face of the man who'd rebuilt her life from the ground up. The scar above his eyebrow, the jaw that never unclenched, the gray eyes that right now, in this moment, held something she'd never seen in them before. Fear. Not for himself, for her. For the distance between them that he could feel widening with every second she didn't respond. The power of attorney, Ava said. Explain that. My legal team generated the documents because the facility wouldn't release your mother without authorized paperwork, and we didn't have time. You forged my signature. Yes. Without my consent. There wasn't time for consent, Ava. Victor's extraction team was 20 minutes behind mine. If they'd reached the facility first, your mother wouldn't be sleeping safely in her bed right now. She'd be in a shipping container headed for a location specifically chosen to break you. The image hit her like a physical blow. She felt it in her stomach, a sick, lurching sensation that bent her forward slightly before she caught herself. That's convenient, she said, and her voice was steady even though nothing else about her was. Every time I challenge you, there's a bigger threat. Every time I try to leave, the danger escalates. It's like you're writing the story in real time, and the only plotline available is the one where I need you. Or it's exactly what it appears to be. A dangerous situation getting worse because dangerous people are doing dangerous things, and I'm the only barrier between you and the consequences. The barrier is also the cause, Lucian. You brought me into this. You chose to answer that text. You chose to track me down and insert yourself into my life. Every threat against me exists because of you. He flinched. The same micro-expression from the penthouse study, the same crack in the facade, but deeper now, wider, as if the structural integrity of whatever held Lucian Moretti together was finally beginning to fail. You're right, he said. She blinked. She'd expected the argument, expected the justification, the redirect, the smooth chess move that repositioned the conversation in his favor. She hadn't expected surrender. "Every threat against you exists because of me," Lucian said. "I knew that when I answered the text. I knew it when I tracked your phone. I knew it when I walked through the rain and saw you standing under that awning and made the selfish, dangerous, indefensible decision to bring you into my world instead of walking away. I know it now, and I will know it for the rest of my life." He took another step toward her. She didn't retreat. "But the video is a lie," he continued. "I did not order your mother's removal to control you. I ordered her transfer to protect her. And the fact that those two things look identical from where you're standing is the exact reason I should have left you alone that night." A car passed on the street behind them, its headlights washing across their faces and then moving on, leaving them in the sodium yellow glow of the streetlight overhead. "How do I know?" Ava said, and her voice finally broke. Not dramatically, quietly, a hairline fracture running through her words like a crack in foundation. "How do I know anything you've ever said to me is real? How do I know the man in the rain wasn't a performance? How do I know the dinners and the opera and the things you said about feeling something when you read my text weren't just tools to get me exactly where I am right now, standing on a sidewalk in Brooklyn at 11 o'clock at night with nowhere to go?" Lucienne closed the distance between them. Not fast, not aggressive. The slow, deliberate approach of a man who understood that the woman in front of him was deciding right now whether to trust him or to disappear into a life he'd never be part of. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell the city on him, exhaust and rain, and the metallic undertone that she now understood was adrenaline, not cologne. His hand rose slowly, carefully, and came to rest against the side of her face. His palm was rough, warm, trembling. Lucienne Moretti's hand was trembling. "You can't know," he said. "That's the truth I owe you. You can't know. You can never be certain. Not about me, not about the video, not about whether any of this was real. All you can do is decide who I am based on what you felt in the moments when I wasn't performing. And if those moments weren't enough, then walk away. Right now, I won't follow. You'll always follow. Not this time." His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. It vibrated again and again. The fourth time, Marco appeared at the SUV's window with an expression that cut through the night like a blade. "Boss, we've got a problem. Sava's people just hit the warehouse on 11th, the one with the archives." Lucian didn't move, didn't look away from Ava. "How bad?" he asked, his eyes still on hers. "Bad. They've got fire crews on scene, and they're saying Sava's sending a team to the penthouse, tonight, now." The word hung in the air between them, now. Lucian's hand was still on her face. His eyes were still locked on hers. And in those gray irises, Ava watched a war play out in real time. The man who wanted to stay here on this sidewalk and prove himself to the woman who'd cracked him open, and the king whose empire was burning and who could not afford to stand still while it did. "Go," Ava said. "Come with me." "Lucienne, I am asking you, not ordering, not arranging, not deploying infrastructure to remove your alternatives. I am asking you, Ava, come with me. Help me end this. And when it's over, I will answer every question you have and accept whatever you decide." Another car passed. More headlights. More shadows chasing each other across their faces. Ava looked at the man in front of her, the trembling hand, the scared eyes, the monster who'd built a kingdom in blood and was standing here on a Brooklyn sidewalk asking a paralegal from Washington Heights to save him, not from his enemies, but from the possibility that she might never believe he was real. She thought about her mother, about Sophie upstairs with the forged document in her hands, about the apartment in Washington Heights with the west-facing window and the sunset that turned the Hudson to copper, about the woman she'd been 7 days ago, standing in the rain, sending a message to the wrong number because the right people had stopped answering. "If you're lying to me," Ava said, "I will burn your entire world to the ground, and I'll have the evidence to do it." Lucian's mouth curved, not the ghost of a smile, not the architectural blueprint, the real thing. Broken, exhausted, full of a relief so profound it looked like pain. "I'd expect nothing less." She got in the car. The convoy ripped through Brooklyn toward the bridge, 3 vehicles moving as a single organism through streets that parted for them, the way water parts for warships. In the back seat, Lucien was already on the phone, rapid Italian, his free hand gripping his knee, his voice carrying the cadence of a general whose battlefield had shifted beneath him while he was looking somewhere else. Marco turned from the front seat and handed Ava a tablet. On the screen, surveillance footage showed men in dark clothing moving through the lobby of Lucian's building. 6, maybe 7, their faces obscured, their movements tactical, coordinated. "They're inside," Marco said flatly. Lucien ended his call, looked at the tablet, looked at Ava. The penthouse has a secondary entrance through the parking garage, a freight elevator that bypasses the main lobby. My security team will clear the building from the ground up, but I need to get to my study before Sava's people do. There's a safe in that room that contains every piece of evidence I have against Victor. Recordings, financial records, documentation of every crime his organization has committed in the last decade. If he gets those files, he doesn't just destroy me. He destroys every witness, every cooperator, every person who ever risked their life to help me build a case against him. Ava stared at him. "You're building a case? Against another criminal?" "I'm building an exit strategy, one that trades Victor Sava to the federal government in exchange for immunity. Every piece of it is in that safe." He paused. "It's also the evidence that proves the video you received was fabricated. The original recordings are there, unedited, time-stamped, verified by 3 separate sources." The convoy hit the bridge. Manhattan rose ahead of them, a wall of light and glass and ambition, and somewhere in the center of it, men with weapons were moving through the building where Ava had spent the most confusing, terrifying, intoxicating 5 days of her life. Ava looked at the tablet, at the dark figures in the lobby, at the blinking red dot that represented the penthouse, the study, the safe, the truth. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Lucien turned to her, and in his eyes, beneath the fear and the fury and the grinding machinery of a man who had spent his entire life in control of everything. Watching it all slip away at once, she saw something simple and devastating. Gratitude. "Stay close to me," he said, "and when we get inside, don't look away from anything you see. I need you to witness all of it. The real thing, not the version Victor manufactured. Every ugly, bloody, honest piece of who I am." The convoy pulled into the underground garage. The engines cut. Silence flooded the vehicle. Heavy, electric, the silence before a detonation. Marco checked his weapon. The driver checked his. From the other 2 SUVs, 8 men emerged in coordinated silence, each one armed, each one moving with the mechanical precision of people who had rehearsed violence until it became muscle memory. Lucien opened his door. Ava opened hers. And together they stepped into the garage and toward the freight elevator. While above them, somewhere in the 37 floors between the concrete they stood on and the penthouse where the truth waited behind a locked safe, the sound of breaking glass echoed down through the building's bones like the first crack in a world about to shatter. The freight elevator climbed through the building's spine like a bullet traveling up a barrel. Ava stood with her back against the cold steel wall, watching the floor numbers tick upward on the digital display. 7, 8, 9, 10, each one bringing her closer to whatever waited above. Beside her, Lucien had gone somewhere she couldn't follow. His body was present, the rolled sleeves, the tattoos, the jaw locked tight enough to crack teeth. But behind his eyes, the man she'd argued with on the Brooklyn sidewalk had been replaced by something older, colder, built for rooms where people didn't walk out the same way they walked in. Marco stood at the front of the elevator, his weapon drawn, the muzzle pointed at the ceiling, his breathing so controlled it barely moved his chest. Behind them, 4 of Lucien's men pressed against the walls in tactical formation, each one a coiled mechanism waiting for the doors to open and the equation to begin. Floor 19, 20, 21. Lucien's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. "Sava's team has the 34th floor," he said, his voice stripped of everything except information. 6 men, armed. They haven't reached the penthouse yet. The building security system shows them moving up the main stairwell. "How many floors between them and the study?" Ava asked. 3. The elevator passed floor 28, 29, 30. "When the doors open," Lucien said without looking at her, "you stay behind Marco. You don't stop moving until you reach the study. The safe combination is 411708. The files are in a black case on the second shelf. Everything you need is inside. The original recordings, the financial documents, the immunity paperwork. Get the case and get back to this elevator. That's all. What about you? I'll be between you and them. The elevator hit floor 34 and kept climbing. 35. 36. The penthouse level was 37. Ava reached out and grabbed Lucian's wrist. He turned. In the fluorescent light of the freight elevator, his face was a landscape of sharp angles and deeper shadows, and the scar above his eyebrow looked like a fault line running through stone. "If you die up there," she said, "I'm still taking those files to the FBI." Something flickered in those gray eyes. Not hurt, not surprise, but recognition. The recognition of a man looking at someone who'd just proven she couldn't be owned, not by him, not by anyone, not even now. "Good," he said. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. The penthouse service corridor smelled like smoke and broken glass. The overhead lights had been cut, either by Sava's team or by Lucian's security protocols, leaving only the emergency strips along the baseboards, which cast everything in a dim red glow that made the marble floors look like they were bleeding. Marco moved first, low and fast, his weapon sweeping the corridor in practiced arcs. Lucien went second, pulling a handgun from a holster Ava hadn't noticed beneath his untucked shirt. Matte black, compact, the kind of object that fit his hand like it had been manufactured specifically for his grip. He moved differently with the weapon drawn. Every step deliberate, every angle checked, every doorway treated as a potential threat. This was not the man who'd held a champagne flute at the opera. This was the version beneath the version, the original, the foundation upon which everything civilized had been carefully constructed and was now being deliberately stripped away. Ava followed. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, behind her eyes. The corridor branched left toward the main living areas and right toward the private wing where the study waited. Through the walls she could hear sounds, distant footsteps, muffled voices, the sharp metallic clatter of something heavy being knocked over several floors below. They reached the intersection. Marco held up a fist and everyone stopped. Voices from the left corridor, close. Two men, speaking in a language Ava didn't recognize. Clipped, guttural, the cadence of people coordinating movement under pressure. Shadows shifted against the far wall, elongated by the red emergency lighting into something monstrous. Lucien pressed his back against the corner and held up 2 fingers to Marco. Marco nodded. Then Lucien turned to Ava and pointed right, toward the study. His eyes said everything his voice couldn't. Go, now. Don't wait for me. Ava went. She moved down the right corridor on legs that didn't feel entirely connected to her body, passing the guest suite where she'd slept for 5 nights, passing the kitchen where she'd confronted him about the closet, passing all the architecture of a life she'd almost let herself believe was real. The study door was ahead, heavy, dark wood, slightly ajar. Behind her the sounds began, not gunshots, not yet. The sounds that came before gunshots, the heavy collision of bodies, the grunt of a man absorbing a blow, the sharp crack of something hitting something else with enough force to rearrange bone. Lucien and Marco engaging Sava's advance team in the corridor she'd just left. Ava pushed the study door open and entered. The room had been tossed, bookshelves emptied, drawers pulled out and overturned, the desk lamp shattered on the floor, its shade bent into a shape that looked like a broken wing. But the wall panel behind the desk, the one that concealed the safe, was still intact. They hadn't found it yet. She crossed the room, stepping over broken glass and scattered papers, and pressed the panel. It swung open on silent hinges, revealing a steel safe embedded in the wall. Her hands were shaking so badly she missed the first number twice. She closed her eyes, breathed, opened them. 411708. The lock clicked. The safe door swung open. Inside, exactly where Lucien said it would be, a black leather case sat on the second shelf. She grabbed it. Heavy, heavier than she expected, packed with what felt like hard drives and document folders and the accumulated weight of a man's entire attempt to unmake the world he'd built. A gunshot exploded somewhere in the corridor, then 2 more in rapid succession, then silence. Ava clutched the case to her chest and turned toward the door. She made it 3 steps before the door swung fully open and a man she'd never seen stepped through. He was compact, thick-necked, with a shaved head and a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts, a nose broken and reset more than once, eyes set too close together, a mouth that curled at the corners with the kind of cruelty that enjoyed its own performance. He wore a dark tactical vest over a black shirt, and the gun in his hand was pointed directly at Ava's chest. "Put it down," he said. His accent was Eastern European, heavy on the consonants, the English rough but functional. Ava didn't move. "The case," he gestured with the gun barrel. "On the floor, now." "No." The word came out before she could think about it. Not brave, not calculated. Just the raw, stubborn refusal of a woman who'd spent her entire life being told what to do by men who assumed her compliance was inevitable. The man's expression shifted from command to confusion to something approaching amusement. "You think you're in a position to negotiate? I think you were sent to get what's in this case, and if you shoot me, you risk destroying the drives inside. So, no, I don't think I'm negotiating. I think I'm the only thing between your boss and what he wants. And that makes me more valuable alive than dead." The man's eyes narrowed. For 3 long seconds, the red emergency light pulsed across his face like a heartbeat. Then he smiled. "Smart girl," he said, and stepped toward her. The impact came from the side, not a bullet, not a blade, but a body. Lucien hit Sava's man with the full force of a 6'2" frame moving at combat speed, driving his shoulder into the man's ribcage and slamming them both into the bookshelves with a crash that brought the remaining volumes down around them like an avalanche of leather and paper. The gun discharged into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Ava stumbled backward, clutching the case, watching 2 men fight with a brutality that had no choreography, no elegance, no Hollywood polish, just the ugly, desperate mechanics of 2 bodies trying to destroy each other in a confined space. Lucien's fist connected with the man's jaw, and the sound was wet, organic, the sound of meat hitting meat. The man drove his knee into Lucien's ribs, and Ava heard the breath leave Lucien's body in a ragged gasp. They rolled across the broken glass on the floor, each one grappling for the gun, each one bleeding from cuts that neither of them acknowledged. Lucien got the gun. The shot was point blank, close enough that the muzzle flash illuminated Lucien's face in a strobe of white light, and in that fraction of a second, Ava saw everything. The blood smeared across his cheekbone, the sweat soaking through his shirt, the absolute absence of hesitation in his eyes. The man went still. Lucien stayed on the floor for a moment, chest heaving, blood dripping from a cut above his ear. Then he pushed himself up, staggered, caught his balance against the desk, and looked at Ava. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Words wouldn't come. "The case?" She held it up. Her arms were trembling so badly the case shook like a living thing. "We need to go," he said. "Now." They moved through the penthouse in a nightmare haze. Lucien leading, bleeding, his left arm hanging at an angle that suggested something was wrong with his shoulder. Marco met them at the service corridor, equally battered, a gash across his forearm that was seeping dark red through the sleeve of his coat. 2 of Lucien's men flanked the elevator. 2 more were gone, left behind in the corridors, their status communicated only by the tight expression on Marco's face and the way he avoided making eye contact with Lucien. The elevator ride down was silent, except for breathing. Heavy, ragged, the collective respiration of people who had just been inside something that would live behind their eyelids for years. They hit the garage level. The convoy was running, engines idling, doors open. Lucien guided Ava into the center vehicle and slid in beside her, and the motorcade pulled out into the Manhattan night. In the back seat, Ava opened the black case. Inside, neatly organized, were 6 hard drives, each one labeled with dates and reference codes, a stack of financial documents bound with rubber bands, and a small digital recorder with a dated sticker on its side, the same date as the night Lucien had made the phone call about her mother. "Play it," Lucien said. He was pressing a hand against his ribs, his breathing shallow, his face drained of color beneath the streetlight glow filtering through the tinted windows. "The recorder. Play the original." Ava pressed play. Lucien's voice filled the vehicle, clear, unedited, continuous. The same phone call she'd heard on the fabricated video, but complete, whole, and devastatingly different. The Monroe woman's mother, Greenfield Assisted Living in Queens. Get a transfer team there before Sava's people realize she matters. Legal documents only. Nothing that can be challenged later. I want the old woman moved to our secure medical facility on the Upper West Side. Full nursing staff, private room, round-the-clock care. If the daughter finds out before I can explain, make sure she has every number she needs to reach me. I don't want her afraid. I want her informed. The recording continued, logistics, medical specifications, a detailed conversation with a lawyer about the fastest way to generate legitimate transfer documentation. But Ava had stopped listening. She was staring at the recorder in her hands. I don't want her afraid. I want her informed. The fabricated video had ended with, if the daughter resists, remind her she has nowhere else to go. Two versions of the same man, one manufactured by an enemy, one real. And the real one had been trying to protect her mother while also protecting her dignity, her autonomy, her right to make decisions about her own life. The forgery wasn't the act of a captor. It was the act of a man operating in a world where 40 minutes meant the difference between safety and catastrophe, making an imperfect choice with imperfect tools because perfect wasn't available. Ava set the recorder down. She looked at Lucian. The blood on his face was drying. His breathing had stabilized, but his left arm still hung wrong, and the exhaustion in his features was so complete that the mask, the one she'd watched him wear and remove and wear again over the course of 7 impossible days, was finally entirely gone. What was left was just a man, bruised, bleeding, frightened. A man who'd built a kingdom he was trying to dismantle from the inside. A man who'd answered a wrong number text because something in those 3 desperate words had spoken to a loneliness so deep he'd never let himself look directly at it. I believe you, Ava said. Lucien closed his eyes. His head dropped back against the seat, and the breath that left his body was the longest, slowest exhale she'd ever heard. The sound of a man releasing something he'd been holding so tightly and for so long that letting go of it felt like losing a limb. I need to tell you something, he said without opening his eyes. Tell me. The immunity deal. The files in that case. I've been building it for 3 years. Every piece of evidence against Victor Sava, every financial trail, every witness statement, all of it assembled into a package designed to hand to the federal government in exchange for a reduced sentence and witness protection. Witness protection, Ava repeated. A new name, a new city, a complete erasure of everything I've been. He opened his eyes and turned to look at her. I was going to do it alone. That was the plan. Disappear alone. Let the Moretti name die with the empire. And now? Now I'm asking you to come with me. The car crossed the Brooklyn Bridge for the 2nd time that night. Manhattan lay ahead, burning, indifferent, a city that would forget both of them the moment they vanished from its grid. You're asking me to give up everything, Ava said. My name, my apartment, Sophie, my mother. Your mother would come with us. Full medical care, better than what she has now. Sophie would be told you're safe, but not where you are. And everything else, the name, the apartment, the city, those are things you were already losing when I found you. The truth of it settled between them like something heavy laid gently on a table. When? Ava asked. 72 hours. The federal prosecutor is ready. The handoff happens Friday. After that, Lucien Moretti ceases to exist. And who do you become? Whoever you need me to be. Ava looked out the window at the city sliding past, the bodegas and the brownstones, the fire escapes and the fluorescent-lit laundromats, all the ordinary landmarks of a life she'd built from scraps and stubbornness and the daily refusal to become her mother. She thought about the woman on the rooftop restaurant 7 days ago, the one with the dead phone and the empty bank account and the blind date who never came. That woman had sent a text into the void expecting nothing, because nothing was what the world had consistently delivered. And instead of nothing, she'd gotten this. A man, a monster, a kingdom crumbling, and a door opening onto something she couldn't see but could feel pulling at her like gravity. I have conditions, Ava said. Name them. I finish my paralegal certification. Wherever we go, whatever name I use, I finish what I started. Done. My mother gets the best care available. Not just adequate. The best. Already arranged. And you never, ever make a decision about my life without telling me first. No forged signatures, no background checks, no closets full of clothes measured while I'm sleeping. You treat me like a partner, or you lose me. Those are the terms. Lucien turned to face her fully. The man looking at her now was not the one who'd stepped out of the SUV in the rain. Not the one who'd held a champagne flute at the opera or whispered possessive promises against her skin. This man was stripped down, excavated, the rubble of everything he'd constructed cleared away to reveal the foundation underneath. Cracked, imperfect, but solid. Partners, he said. Not possessions. Not possessions. He reached into his jacket, carefully, with his right hand, the left arm still hanging at his side, and pulled out a small velvet box. Old, worn at the edges, the fabric faded to a color that existed somewhere between black and dark green. "This was my mother's," he said. "She died when I was 14. It's the only thing I have left of someone who loved me before I became what I became." He opened the box. Inside, an emerald ring sat on a cushion of aged silk. The stone wasn't perfect. A visible inclusion ran through its center like a frozen crack of lightning, a flaw that somehow made it more beautiful, more real, more honest than any flawless gem could ever be. "I was going to give you this on the balcony," Lucian said. "After the war was over, after the empire was dismantled, after everything was clean and safe and cinematic. But nothing about us has ever been clean or safe or cinematic. So I'm giving it to you now, in the back of an armored car, covered in blood, with a dislocated shoulder and a federal immunity deal, in a case on your lap." Ava looked at the ring, at the flaw running through the emerald like a fracture that had learned to hold itself together. "I'm not asking you to marry a king," Lucian said. "The king is dying. I'm asking you to build something new with the man underneath." Ava took the ring out of the box. She turned it in her fingers, feeling the weight of it, the history, the imperfection. Then she slid it onto her own finger, not waiting for him to do it, not letting someone else define the moment, and looked at him with eyes that were clear and dry and absolutely certain. "The man underneath better be worth it," she said. "He's going to spend the rest of his life trying to be." 3 days later, Lucien Moretti walked into the FBI field office on Federal Plaza and handed over the black case. The handoff took 4 hours. When it was done, Victor Sava's organization had 72 hours before federal agents would dismantle it piece by piece, and the name Moretti was erased from every registry, every database, every whispered conversation, in every back room of every borough. Ava sat in the waiting room of the federal building with her mother sleeping in a wheelchair beside her, Margaret's thin hand resting on Ava's knee, the emerald ring catching the overhead fluorescent light and splitting it into something that looked from certain angles almost like hope. Sophie had been called, told the minimum. She'd cried. Then she'd said the most Sophie thing possible. "You better text me from wherever the hell you end up, or I'm coming to find you myself." When Lucien emerged from the conference room, he looked like a man who'd just set down something impossibly heavy that he'd been carrying for decades. His shoulders were different. His spine was different. Even his walk was different. Slower, less calculated, the stride of someone who no longer needed to enter rooms like he owned them, because he'd finally stopped needing to own anything at all. He looked at Ava, at the ring on her finger, at her mother dozing in the wheelchair, at the new life waiting outside the federal building doors like a car idling at the curb. "Ready?" he asked. Ava stood up. She took the handles of her mother's wheelchair with one hand and reached for Lucien with the other. His fingers closed around hers, rough, warm, trembling again, still trembling, maybe always trembling when it came to her. "One condition," she said. "Another one?" "The last one." "What is it?" Ava looked at the doors ahead, the ones that opened onto a city she was leaving, a name she was shedding, a life she was folding up and putting away like a dress she'd finally outgrown. "Wherever we go," she said, "I pick the restaurant." Lucien's laugh was the first real one she'd ever heard from him. Not the ghost, not the blueprint. The actual sound. Rough, surprised, cracked at the edges, like something that hadn't been used in so long it needed to remember how to work. "Deal," he said. They walked out of the federal building together. The afternoon sun hit Ava's face and she closed her eyes against it, feeling the warmth on her skin, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger, feeling the hand of a man who'd answered a wrong number and followed her into a story neither of them could have predicted. Behind them, Manhattan went on being Manhattan. Loud, indifferent, endlessly hungry, already forgetting their names. Ahead of them, something quieter waited. Something without a skyline or a kingdom or a convoy of black SUVs. Something built not from power, but from the far more difficult materials of honesty, imperfection, and the stubborn human refusal to let the worst thing that ever happened to you be the last thing. Ava Monroe ceased to exist that afternoon, but the woman who walked out of that building, whoever she was about to become, whatever name would appear on the documents waiting in the car, she was, for the first time in her life, exactly who she chose to be. Not rescued, not owned, not surviving, free. And sometimes that's how the greatest love stories begin. Not with a fairy tale, not with a perfect man or a perfect moment or a perfect life. With a wrong number, a rainstorm, and a woman brave enough to answer back.